its strength to forge the pure, unbridled force of rage. Arise, Ravager! Arise! I command you!
This cutscene comes from a D&D video game from 1994 called Wake of the Ravager. It was a game that few people played and far fewer finished. Wake of the Ravager was the second of the two Dark Sun video games, and due to the mixed reception of the first Dark Sun, many D&D fans let this one pass by in favor of more promising RPGs at the time. And unfortunately for those who did pick it up, they were treated to an immensely buggy game that prevented them from reaching completion. Patches were promptly scraped together post-launch, but I mean, this was the 90s we're talking about. Standard practice, as I understand it, was that you had to directly call the developer and have them send you a patch disc via the mail, or you might get lucky and have the patch included in one of the gaming magazines you were subscribed to. Thus, only a tiny fraction of players would ever receive these fixes. That means that the modern digital age is the first time that the patched version has actually been made widely available. Even so, the obscurity of its launch has stopped most people from going back and checking it out. It's somewhat of a shame, because both the writing and the general level and quest design were a titanic step up from the first game. But let's be clear here, even with the patches, this game is jank as hell. The writing and design did take a big step forwards, but the coding took 2 steps back. Still, the ideas in Wake of the Ravager are well worth talking about today, as I consider this to deliver on the Dark Sun setting in ways that the first game never did. I'm not going to recap the lore on what exactly the Dark Sun setting is, because I covered it pretty extensively in my video on the first game. But the TLDR of it is this. Magic in Dark Sun is sort of an allegory for industry in this setting. It drains the environment as you use it. An apocalyptic set of magical wars launched by a band of human supremacist sorcerers destroyed the entire planet of Athos. And now, those very same sorcerers who destroyed the world rule over the ruins. That puts you roughly up to speed with what needs to be known for Wake of the Ravager. But there is a new piece of lore that I do need to catch you guys up on. And it actually feels kind of condescending to explain it, because, I mean, you probably know what a dragon is, but I'm about to entirely re-explain what a dragon is. It's not what you think. But before we get into that, I want to thank today's sponsor. Chepeku, the team of fantasy battle map makers, are back. They've been drafting up even more maps to add to the 4,000 strong library they've built over the years. This month, they've added another one that's perfect for any Dark Sun game you may want to run at home. The Ancient Stepwell is just one of the many maps they put out each month, with variations. And if you sign up on their Patreon, you'll also have access to years of their high-quality work in the blink of an eye. These are perfect for your virtual tabletops, but if you play in person, they're also built to be printer-friendly too. And if you pick the Master Cartography tier, you get the whole library in one go, plus all the maps they submit each month. Little maps, big maps, blue maps, red maps, and some maps that have not yet come to pass. Okay, but hold the heck up, because that ain't the end of what they've got to offer. Sign up at the highest tier, and you'll also receive animated versions of their maps every single month, like the Coatl Temple that can easily be used as a Sorcerer King's palace. A huge thanks once more to Chepeku. Now, let's talk dragons. If you're buying Christmas gifts, what do you buy for an impossibly powerful and ancient sorcerer monarch who shattered the world in pursuit of power? What could they possibly want? Well, more power. That's the answer. They just want more of it, because Athos? Well, Athos is a little bit like Texas. No, I don't mean the desert. I don't mean how many weapons there are. I am talking specifically about the fact that things, especially magic, are just a little bit bigger around here. And frankly, these human forms are just too limiting to contain all this power. But fortunately, in the world of Dark Sun, spellcasters who have mastered both arcane and psionic magics are capable of transforming into dragons. I say fortunately, but it's actually one of the most horrific things in the entire setting. all of the Sorcerer Kings have begun the process of changing, and they have continued it for hundreds, or in some cases thousands of years. The process is slow, and reading between the lines, it's probably slower now than it used to be, since there's not as much wildlife to suck up for defiling purposes anymore. It's a 10-step process, equivalent to levels 21 to 30 as written in the tabletop rules. Yes, you heard that right. The original rules for Dark Sun allowed and even encouraged you to do this at epic levels if you were playing a Defiler. The great roadblock in this journey is the fact that the process becomes so immensely painful, and your mind becomes so animalistic midway through the transformation that it becomes harder and harder to actually accomplish what needs to be done in order to complete the change. Most of the Sorcerer Kings fall into two camps. There are those who simply cannot progress in their transformation with any amount of speed without help. And these arrogant bastards are the type who will jealously chase off or destroy anyone who would actually be powerful enough to give them that help. Thus, they have spent a virtual eternity living in an agony of their own making, locked there by their own personal flaws. They will eventually succeed, but most of them have been working on this transformation for around 2,000 years, and they're nowhere near close to succeeding. The other kind is the type who saw what was happening to their peers and decided to stop pursuing their transformation before the pain and mental warping became too strong. They can thus revel in the slight number of draconic powers they've earned while only dealing with some minor discomforts. And yet, there is one Sorcerer King in the Tyr region who has succeeded in completing the transformation and becoming a dragon. Boris, the Dragon of Ordroxa, was assisted by the other Sorcerer Kings after they locked their master away at the end of the Cleansing Wars. They did so not out of the kindness of their hearts, but rather because they needed a dragon on hand in case the first sorcerer ever escaped. And Boris, the Dragon of Ordroxa, is the ultimate villain of our story today, albeit not one who gets defeated outright. Before we get to him, there's another type of transformation that's worth outlining. While the process of Defilers becoming dragons and druids becoming elementals is outlined in the 2nd edition expansion book Dragon Kings, so too is the process by which a preserver, who I remind you are the magic users who protect nature, may begin the process of becoming an Avangion. These are the anti-dragons, creatures of such selflessness that they literally become the natural world. They are pure, unfiltered good on a primal, cosmic level, the kind of grand creature who can put a shattered world like Athos back together again. There are no gods in this shattered world, but an Avangion might be the closest it will ever get. The creation of such a creature in this blighted place is a generational task that would take the life's work of thousands of united do-gooders to grow and protect a preternaturally talented and pure-hearted preserver. So, for all the evils of the dragons of Athos, at least there are these greater creatures fighting on the side of good, right? Well, no. Because no Avangion has ever successfully been born. Athos is not that kind of world. Dragons can virtually never be born due to their selfishness, save the near-unique circumstances surrounding Boris. But neither can Avangions due to their selflessness. These are not the types of people who would pursue the kind of power needed to protect themselves in a world of Sorcerer Kings. This is the tragedy at the heart of Dark Sun. The ways in which good and evil, by their respective natures, both inevitably defeat themselves, leaving evil with a miserable upper hand. Dark Sun: Wake of the Ravager, however, starts at a much higher point in the story of Athos. Year 1, the first free year in the entire history of this planet. We find ourselves in the city of Tyr, in the wake not of a Ravager, but of a Sorcerer King who died. Wake of the Ravager begins where Shattered Lands ended, and as such, it's possible to import your characters from the first game. I chose not to do so, specifically because I was kinda dissatisfied with my original party composition. So I chose instead to make a brand new party of starter level characters, and having one of them be a familiar face.
Hey, the big man's back!
And this time, he's headed to the city of Tyr, joined by Daphne, but like not regular Daphne, specifically the version of Daphne who sang with the Hex Girls that one time. She brought with her a druid who's kind of just stopping by. She's on her way to Coachella after this, but sure, she'll help us save the world first. Lastly, my rogue this time was also a hybrid. He had a little fighter mixed in to make him a bit more usable. The boy in question is a mole, which is a Dark Sun unique species, who are essentially half-dwarves. They've got most of the height and the versatility of a human, mixed with the strength and stubbornness of a dwarf. And when I think of these mulled badasses, well, I really start craving spiced Christmas wine. With that done, this becomes a good place to give the first piece of actual analysis before the plot itself begins. The art in this game, it's kind of a sore subject, isn't it? See, I had felt that the art in the first game was a bit cartoony to match the setting all that well. For my Shattered Lands video, I briefly skimmed through character art and clips of the cutscenes in Dark Sun 2 before making the ill-advised comment that it looks like the art is probably better in the second game. I have seldom been more wrong. Credit where it's due. The cutscenes and the player character art is much improved, and it's clear that this is where most of the art team's effort went. But the in-game graphics and the sprite work, it's side grade at best and a downgrade at worst. While effort was put into making things a little bit more grimdark and a little less cartoony, they only really succeeded at making everything uglier, and also slightly wider for some reason. This is especially noticeable when compared to Dungeons & Dragons Al-Qadim, which came out the same year. More work definitely went into the cutscenes though, as I said, and this game includes some of the hardest goddamn game cinematics of the early 90s.
Darkness!
Anyway, back to the narrative. The big man and his new gang arrive in the city of Tyr at a difficult and unstable time in its history. Highlighting this, a woman at the gates claims to be a member of the Veiled Alliance, who, if you remember, were the mystery resistance group we heard name dropped several times in the first game. This resistance member tries to put us in contact with her allies, but is quickly murdered by a group of warriors from the faraway city of Ur-Draxa. We handle the attackers before wandering the city in search of her contacts. Tyr is a city balancing on the razor-thin edge of a knife. Calic, the Sorcerer King, sought his path to dragonhood not by taking the long, painful, and ultimately fruitless path of his peers, but rather by using a vast arcane ziggurat contained within the shell of a pyramid. His scheme required a vast sacrifice in the city arena, turning the greater population of Tyr into fuel for a defiling ritual that would leapfrog him all the way to dragonhood. His plan had a major flaw though. It was reckless to the extreme. Skipping 9 levels of dragonhood in order to speedrun the transformation process was clearly going to be prone to failure, and Calic's odds of success were made all the more dreadful when the gladiators he was meant to slaughter managed instead to mortally wound him with an enchanted spear. So when Calic cast his super spell, he instead tore himself completely out of existence, leaving the city of Tyr as the only state in the Age of Sorcerer Kings to not have a Sorcerer King. The aftermath has been tenuous, though not violent yet. The common people have taken control and freed all the slaves. The city thus far has been quite thrilled, and begins to obtain a little bit more prosperity, even with so little time having passed. Unfortunately, there is one issue. Running a post-apocalyptic city, supplying food, water, and protecting from the psionic monsters that wander the dunes, none of that stuff can be improvised, and the only people who know how to properly administer the city-state are the former servants of Calic that were already doing it. These servants of the Sorcerer King are called Templars. These are the people who trade servitude and religious worship of their overlords in exchange for magical powers. 4th edition Dark Sun would choose to portray Templars as a variant of the Warlock class, with Sorcerer King serving as patrons in the way that devils or elder gods would. So this is the situation. The city has no government, but it does have a bunch of gung-ho citizens who are ready to protect their new freedoms. It has a nascent administration that isn't quite in charge, so much as they are just keeping the lights on. And all of those administrators are ex-warlocks who no longer have a patron. They thusly cannot actually wrestle control of the place from the citizens, because they are powerless, and they're mad about it. The city of Tyr is kind of like the Weimar Republic, and the Templars seem poised to do some real nasty business once they figure out how to retake control. But unlike the Weimar Republic, the city of Tyr has a very big man from Brooklyn to tip the scales. The murdered woman from earlier directed us to a Veiled Alliance contact named Arslan. And this Arslan will only allow us an audience with the Resistance if we can deliver proof of what Calyx Templars are scheming. After we do a little sneaking and a little bit of lying, we eventually catch wind of their plan. What does a band of powerless warlocks do when their god king dies? Well, naturally, they look for a new god to give them the power they covet. Although not every Templar is in on this scheme, the bulk of them have decided to work together to invite Boris, the dragon of Ur-Draxa, into Tyr, quashing the nascent republic and positioning the dragon to use Calyx Ziggurat to fuel his own ambitions of empire within the Tablelands. Upon delivering this dire news, we are ushered into the secret hideout of the Veiled Alliance. Now, despite how I've talked about them so far, the Veiled Alliance is not a true resistance, at least not in the way you're thinking. It's more like an underground network of outcasts working together to survive the Sorcerer Kings. In fact, calling it an alliance is probably more misleading than it should be. While every city does have a Veiled Alliance, none of them are allied with each other. They're not working together. This is an alliance between individual preservers, druids, clerics, and their like, that have often been the subject of various attacks and wars by the Defilers of Athos. And to make matters worse, the commoners are unaware of any difference between these people and your average Sorcerer King. To the bulk of the citizenry and slaves in the city-states, if you use magic, you're one of the people who destroyed the world. Thus, despite being not explicitly revolutionary organizations, the Veiled Alliances have been doing pretty virtuous work in allowing non-evil magic users to survive and work together. But with Calyx dead and the Templars weakened, the Veiled Alliance in Tyr has the opportunity to change things for the better. If their goal is just to survive, then surely the way forwards right now is to be more active, and to prevent Tyr from being taken over by the Dragon of Ur-Draxa. If there was ever a pragmatic time to get revolutionary, it's now. A word is on the lips of every Alliance member: divulgence. Is it time to reveal the existence of preservers and their peers to the common citizens? Is the possibility of an angry mob worth the risk compared to the possibility of the citizens picking up the magical and preserver arts and beginning the process of protecting and restoring the climate of their city-state? It is in this environment, as the Alliance decides whether or not to become a true resistance against the Defilers, that we enter their base. Although they don't yet have the unity to act, their leader, Matthias, tasks us to act for them. We are to breach Calyx Pyramid, to investigate the Ur-Draxans and the Templars that are experimenting with the Ziggurat within. After some poking around, we find the secret entrance and arrive inside Calyx's prized experiment. This is where the level design gets really cool, with lots of interesting puzzles on the way to the top. And once we're on the Ziggurat itself, the battle starts to get even trickier. Enemy resistance gets harder, but even worse than that, the garden at the top is magically enchanted to defend itself, and it will fuck you up if you try to breach. The only weakness is of the Templars' own making. They use enchanted Jan tapestries to teleport around, and we exploit these to teleport into one that they have placed at the apex. A sorcerer stands at the top. She works for the dragon's top lieutenant, defeat a Kaisharga, which is a psionic lich, referred to as the Lord Warrior. We slay this white robe defiler, causing unstable defiling magic to run amok, draining the garden and slaughtering the Draxons and their treasonous Templars en masse. It's really quite a neat sequence, and one of the best moments in the entire game. The loose end is this: the Lord Warrior was here to seize the ziggurat. So, where the hell is he? Well, upon returning to the Veiled Alliance, we find our answer. He has found them, and he has begun the mass slaughter of their entire stronghold. I fight hard through the base, but ultimately, I'm unable to save very many. By the time the stronghold is cleansed of Draxons, less than a half-dozen Alliance members remain. I skipped a side quest earlier involving the ruins of Undertier, so I wasn't really as high level as perhaps I ought to have been for this sequence. As such, I wasn't able to keep the leader, Matthias, alive. This didn't actually sabotage my story, but it did mean I wasn't able to get a bunch of big items and XP rewards throughout the game. The Lord Warrior escapes my clutches, and soon flees to his own secret base, a strange crypt where he aims to hatch a dark plan on behalf of the dragon.
And they call it a mine. A mine!
The surviving Alliance members have lost their ability to defend Tyr, and divulgence is now out of the question. The task of saving this city is now ours, though they will support us as best they can. Matthias's research shows that there were 4 great elemental artifacts that were once used to seal away a great Ravager. Lacking the strength to defeat a Kaisharga and his dragon master, we head off to gather these artifacts. The first is actually a freebie, the Cup of Life. A powerful water artifact is held by a druid within the Alliance. We take it as a gift, and pledge to collect the other elemental relics. The most easily accessible place for us to go is off into the mountains, which is exactly where I'd be if I was an Earth artifact, so I head over there. First up on my agenda is a ton of side quests involving ancient rituals, halflings, turnips, snake people, and an unstoppable cursed warrior. It's all rather unimportant to the general plot, so we'll just skip it here. Point is, I'm now caught up on XP. We enter the iron mines of Tyr. These mines were always what made the city such a dominant force in the region. Now that Kalik is dead, the miners have changed from being slaves to instead being a bunch of excited prospectors, hoping to finally earn some wealth after decades of harsh treatment. Unfortunately, most of the merchants back in Tyr have just been screwing them over, and as such most of the miners have been growing pretty desperate. Desperate enough, in fact, that they go down into the lower levels where miners constantly go missing. Only one miner has ever survived the attacks, screaming in his sleep about face stealers. Oh no, this sounds like it's about to become my problem. Getting to the lower levels of this place is a colossal pain in the ass. The tunnels, however, are meant to be this level of hostile and unnavigable. They were carved by a dwarf who desperately needs to get checked for ADHD. Literally, we have to get you some Ritalin. It will save lives. Anyway, we eventually make it down to the lower levels, and the navigation somehow gets even worse. The sequence of events is pretty good, though, despite the jank. Many of the crews refuse to leave, and as you investigate, you eventually trigger a band of strange cultists to wander the map, butchering the workers. By the time I finally caught them, there were no survivors. Even so, after killing the assailants, we soon track down an entrance to their lair. Oh, it's the Underdark. It's Mind Flayers. Is this a Baldur's Gate 3 reference? Anyway, the Mind Flayers down here are preparing to wipe out the miners for daring to delve near their caverns, and are also hoping to wipe out the surface world with poison. But then where will you get the brains to eat, you fools? You are about to extinct yourselves! Thankfully, I preserved the genetic diversity on Athos by killing these Mind Flayers and especially their Elder Brain to save the Mind Flayer race from extincting themselves. You're welcome. At the end of this, we find the entrance to a lost cavern, guarded by Earth Drakes. In it is Promir's hammer, the artifact of Earth. With it, Wine Man can finally keep up with the big man in combat. Wake of the Ravager follows the proud tradition that many people liked about the first game. The plot threads feel like independent mini-campaigns. As such, it's a bit of a hike out to the next artifact, as it's in an unrelated area of the world. There were a number of teleport tapestries in the Veiled Alliance base. Most of these would send you to various puzzle rooms that could be solved if you had the patience. I did not have the patience. But one tapestry was ripped to shreds and in need of repair. These being Jan tapestries, I naturally headed out to a caravan in order to meet with a Jan tribe off in the dunes. Now, I never figured out the actual etiquette that I was supposed to speak to these people with and was constantly rude to everybody, but they still agreed to fix the tapestry for me anyway. And I agreed to save their kidnapped princess. That was actually one of the side quests I did in the forest. We saved her from some bandits, and it's already taken care of. Job's not quite done though, because we need the thread of a Templar robe and some special magic dye to make the repairs. I scare off the Templar who had originally kidnapped the princess, and then I tear up his cape for thread. The dye, on the other hand, I just had to buy that. All things assembled, I could now bring the tapestry back to its wall and travel through it to a volcano. In this realm of fire, we stumble across a small lizard child called a Verini, who are entirely unique to this game. After saving the little tyke from some elementals, he gives us a high-level description of what's going on here. The Verini have an ancient temple complex they live in nearby, but they're being attacked by Draxons. The Verini are good fighters, but ultimately a peaceful people, and they might be able to defeat the Draxons, but it's gonna cost them a lot of lives. Fortunately, we're here, and after eliminating the Draxon camp near their base, they agree to let us into the temple. Inside, we catch a glimpse of the internal politics. The preserver who led the Verini to this temple placed a great seal to keep it safe from the raging volcano below. This seal required a Verini to speak for it, in a sort of religious position called the Keeper, and this Keeper ruled the tribe. This has been the political state of things for around 500 nice, peaceful years. But now, a number of Verini youth have grown dissatisfied with being ruled over by a theocrat, and have thrown off the shackles of authoritarian rule and declared themselves to be in open rebellion until something approaching democracy is implemented. But the Verini are not simply a peaceful tribe, they're more like a very healthy family. Neither the elders nor the youth would ever actually dream of harming one another. The rebellion essentially takes the form of arguments and protest. But there is a complication. One of the elders, by the name of Sorval, mysteriously died by having a statue pushed atop him. I mean, it's obviously murder, but the Verini on both sides are so appalled that none of them can even conceive of the idea of a Verini doing this to one another. I actually love these precious little gecko guys. They're such a little spot of optimism in a dark world. Anyway, we agreed to investigate. It doesn't take long to prove that it's murder, but it takes significantly longer to figure out who did it. It's a lot of wandering, finding Sorval's journal entries, and eventually interrogating a thief, but in the end, we find the culprit. And it was kind of the obvious candidate. It was the scheming Elder Galanix who always felt like he was living in the Keeper's shadow. Sorval caught him plotting to murder the Seal Keeper, Nostramus, and was then killed to cover it up. Unfortunately, we discover this detail too late, and the little bastard Galanix murders Nostramus too. We confront him, but it seems that this shock to the Verini's faith has caused the seal to weaken, and Galanix, as a new and unworthy keeper, is not capable of protecting his tribe.
I am Keeper of the Order now. You must obey me. You must obey me. I am Keeper. Obey. I can't control it. I can't. We're doomed. I can't control it. I can't. We're doomed. I can't do it.
So, into the volcano we go by the request of the tribe's storyteller, in order to collect an elemental relic called the Fire Ruby. The seal, in fact, was little more than a lullaby meant to keep this ruinous artifact dormant, lest it cause the entire ringing mountain range to erupt in sequence and bury the world in ash. We descend below to find the Draxons tunneled their way here first. We dispatch them as we approach the ruby, but soon we hit a major stumbling block. This section is actually timed, and that is a huge problem, because a lot of DOS games, this one included, had their timers tied to the speed of your computer's processor. And since I was playing this on a modern computer, the timer would time out so unbelievably quickly, and the volcano would erupt every time. Fortunately, the workaround was relatively simple. I had to reload into before I'd entered the volcano, set the difficulty to easy, and then re-enter so that the the timer had a virtually unlimited span. It does the trick, and soon I've taken the fire ruby from the lava. We made a mad dash for the exit, and the seal reforms. We will now be taking the artifact with us, so the Verini no longer need to have a keeper to protect it, and the youthful Verini can get the democracy they've been fighting for. Good for them, honestly. I'm happy with how this little chunk of the tale ended. Being that we just finished up a section with a cutscene, now's probably the moment to comment on the sound design and the music. In regards to the sound effects, there's not a huge difference from the first game. It's sort of on the upper end of sound work for 1994, but it's hugely held back by the variety of sounds. The fact that the music volume controls are bugged also means that you can't hear very much of it under the crushing weight of guitar solos. The voice work, on the other hand, is a big step up from the sound design. It was similarly excellent in the cutscenes, but it was also just generally good throughout the game.
Silence! Do not tell me what is mine, slave. Forces are awakening that you cannot comprehend. Simple fools! Give up your pathetic efforts to stop me.
Finally, let's talk music. The first game had the weird aspect where the soundtrack was all really upbeat music, despite the game being supposedly a dark fantasy apocalypse. I'm happy to report that Wake of the Ravager has mostly done away with this problem. There are still some jazzy tracks, which are actually somewhat welcome as they help link the two games together, but for the most part the songs are far more serious, and with a lot more electric guitar than the first game. I think most people can agree that this is what 90s Dark Sun is supposed to sound like. We return from our wholesome fire vacation back to Tyr and the forces that would control it. We will not be staying long, however, for the next place we must go is into another tapestry in the Veiled Alliance HQ. This time we find ourselves in a cloud giant village. Compared to the plot lines we've already covered, the story here is noticeably smaller. Figure out how to navigate some islands and chasms to reach an air drake nest, scare them away with a magic flute, and then free some prisoners from their nest. Also, the air artifact is here. Congrats, we now possess all four. Returning to Tyr once more, the surviving Alliance members tell me that the Lord Warrior has drained an entire mountain of life in order to prepare a profane ritual. The ritual to summon a Tarrasque. Rewind. Okay, Tarrasque's kind of a big deal in D&D. They occupy a place in the system's game balancing as, like our PCs, our player characters have defeated all the big bads, and they're now the biggest damned heroes in the world. Now, I wonder if they can kill Godzilla. The Tarrasque is often a capstone at the end of the campaign. The campaign would be finished, and DMs would just, throw a Tarrasque at the party just to see if they could do it. These things are monstrously powerful, designed to be highly resistant to basically everything, and they regenerate an ungodly amount of health in most editions. If they're added to a D&D game within the actual canon, instead of, just a non-canon, let's see what happens at the end of it, they usually have the narrative positioning as being a world ender. The Tarrasque is basically the apocalypse in most settings. So we need to stop the Lord Warrior. We need to stop him, right now. We smash through the Crypt Guardian and his golems, and crash our way into the tomb below the city. We soon discover that the Lord Warrior's plans have advanced far beyond what the dragon wanted, and a rebellious Templar explains. You see, the Lord Warrior is very powerful, and it was clear to all that he would soon be in a position to begin the transformation into a dragon. But there is already a dragon in Ur-Draxa, and dragons do not share power. But Boris had a protocol in place for exactly this, so that he would not be required to constantly murder his top servants. He transforms each of them into Kaisharga, which, as I explained earlier, are psionic liches. It's a huge power leap from being a regular old defiler, but the upper level of strength that can be obtained as a Kaisharga is still orders of magnitude smaller than what a dragon is capable of. And even more conveniently for Boris, dead creatures cannot transform into dragons. That is a horror reserved solely for the living. The Lord Warrior, empowered by his transformation but embittered by his lost potential, is actually thrilled that we defeated his army in Calyx Ziggurat. It provided him an opportunity to go underground, far from the dragon's gaze. After weeks of preparation, his great act of rebellion is to bind an ancient Tarrasque, referred to in legend as the Ravager. With this Ravager, he intends to demolish Tyr, raising whatever is left as his own army. His own psionic might, the apocalyptic strength of the Ravager, and the army of undead he'll raise from the ashes of the city will be enough to defeat Boris. The Lord Warrior assumes anyway. Going off of lore, is that truly gonna be enough to defeat a Dark Sun dragon? To be honest, I'm not certain. Certainly Boris doesn't seem to be too worried. At the end of the crypt, we find a portal to the Temple of the Cosmos, a hidden pocket dimension protected by druids and a Pyrene.
Enhance. 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 Enhance computer images.
Stop it! This is not how computers work.
And by the time we reach the center, the Lord Warrior's plan has already come to fruition. He defiles the entire lost temple.
Darkness, gather to me. Yield to my will and grant me the indomitable power of chaos. Death, break free from earthly bonds. Take life's imperfect strength to forge the pure, unbridled force of rage. Arise, Ravager! Arise! I command you! Behold your death!
So obviously, fighting a Kaisharga and a Tarrasque at the same time, it's a nightmare. And the fact that there's a bunch of Draxons and skeletons and stuff helping, that just makes things worse. Still though, the game engine kinda has the problem that single enemies are never hard to beat, only large numbers of enemies. Thus, by using the tactic of spamming every damned mind control spell in my arsenal to tilt the numbers in my favor, the battle is winnable, and the Tarrasque's shell is broken by Promir's Earthhammer and the big man's enchanted swords. Still, that's hardly enough to kill a Tarrasque. I did mention that they regenerate like mad. We have limited time, and so with the Lord Warrior's army having become my own through psionics and preserver magic, I dispose of the hateful Kaisharga. The 4 elemental artifacts once bound the Ravager, and they will do so again if you hurry. I slot them in place, and the Ravager is once more bound. The Lord Warrior is dead, but the dragon lives on, sure to continue his evil schemes elsewhere in the world.
Not even your death will save you from my wrath, slave!
The Dark Sun video games were clearly intended as a longer series than this. At minimum, I think it was supposed to be a trilogy, but probably a lot more than that. We never got Game 3 though, due to a mix of how incompetently the Dark Sun games were assembled, and SSI losing the license to make D&D games. The story feels unfinished to some degree, as though we got 2 seasons of a TV show that was intended to run for 4. Game 1 capped your character levels at 9. Game 2 capped them out at 15, and I'm damn certain the devs wanted this system to eventually reach epic levels and include transformations into dragons and Evangions. But the tabletop has some amount of this incomplete feeling as well. This is a dead setting, a setting left to some degree unfinished. It lies mostly within the realm of 2nd edition D&D, with a short-lived revamp for 4th. And look, I've been tiptoeing around the culture war surrounding Dark Sun during this video and the last one, but I think it's important that we talk about it. A clip came out this year from an interview on Bob Worldbuilder's channel, which is a great D&D channel, by the way, go check him out, of Kyle Brink, the executive producer of D&D, saying that Dark Sun isn't being brought back because it's problematic.
Any potential, and I feel like I know the answer to this, any potential that we would see a revision or republishing of the Dark Sun setting.
I'll be frank here. The Dark Sun setting is problematic.
I agree.
In a lot of ways. That's the main reason we haven't come back to it.
Generally speaking, this statement has been taken at face value to what is, in my opinion, a frustrating degree. New D&D fans who aren't acquainted with the setting just assume based on this statement that Dark Sun was some, old D&D game that was, filled with phrenology or something. Meanwhile, older fans have generally heard this and assume that the newer generation is too sensitive and is attempting to cancel Dark Sun. But look, here's the thing. I've been trying to figure out how to talk about this for weeks now, and I've been researching the hell out of it, and, here's my conclusion. The culture war around Dark Sun, it's not real. It isn't happening. It's fiction. It's a total fabrication. I think Kyle Brink is just being, if not lazy, then he's being extremely stingy with design resources. Let me explain. If you go searching for actual real people calling Dark Sun problematic, you won't find a lot. There's a handful of tweets. Most are either people parroting the line that Dark Sun is problematic with little to no explanation, or you'll find tweets from people who do like Dark Sun but want to see it done with a little bit more tact surrounding sensitive issues with race and slavery. Dark Sun just doesn't fit cleanly into a culture war. Its fundamental themes are about environmentalism and the evils of industrialists. It's pretty anti-billionaire, pro-working class, and it's got a great critique about why the people at the top are totally fine watching the climate collapse. It's because they know they will still lord over whatever is left. At its core, I think the messaging would really hit with younger fans. Most of the stuff that is considered problematic is kind of just a lack of sensitivity in the way the original stuff was written around controversial topics. Most of this is just stuff that can be pretty easily written out. And this same kind of lack of tact over certain issues was all over old D&D. And the Forgotten Realms weren't considered unsalvageable. Last video we just talked about some Faerun apartheid kingdoms. There's not really a good reason for why Dark Sun is getting singled out. You may come across takes saying that Dark Sun is the setting about slavery and racism, and to some degree that's true, but it's also very reductionist. If written correctly and in accordance with its themes, Dark Sun isn't supposed to be the slavery setting, it's supposed to be the anti-slavery setting. It's supposed to be the setting where you see the maniacs who destroyed the world in a race war and you just feel sick to your stomach with anger. If you write this setting well, if you do a good job, there's no reason it can't resonate with a modern audience. But I think that's the real thing that Kyle Brink finds problematic about Dark Sun. If you want to do this in the modern day, you can't get lazy. You have to put the work in to really nail the writing, and to land those core themes, to hire a diverse writing team who can deliver these messages with a degree of sensitivity. You have to do a good job, to not just rush this thing out, and to spend at least 2 years deving a revamped Dark Sun. You need to be creating sick artwork and villains and character options that will draw in modern players into a work of fundamentally alien fantasy. So I don't think Kyle Brink is being honest when he says Dark Sun is too problematic to come back. The thing that he finds problematic is that it's more profitable to deliver yet another 6 books about niche details about the Sword Coast. So let's not kid ourselves. Gen Z hasn't stolen Dark Sun from anyone. They don't even know what that is. The real culprits are Hasbro's accountants. And it was worth talking about all of this in connection with the Wake of the Ravager, because an unwillingness on behalf of a corporation to take the time to do a good job with the property, that's also the exact reason we never got a third Dark Sun video game. It really sucks that Dark Sun has such neat ideas, but it keeps getting let down by companies. But honestly, that's about the most Dark Sun thing that could have happened to this setting. The Sorcerer Kings are literally a metaphor for the types of greedy corporate villains who cause these problems in the first place. And just like on Athos, the bastards always win. But never completely. Dark Sun will likely never have that one great seminal work that makes the setting feel complete. And once again, that's exactly the story of Dark Sun. The work of heroes on Athos has never been completed. Centuries pile atop one another, with thousands sacrificing their lives to create that lasting victory, an entity that pushes back the darkness. The great catharsis of saving Athos, both in our world and in the text itself, is presented as an unwinnable battle, but it's also a battle that's worth fighting. Dark Sun still exists for older editions of D&D, but I mean it also exists in terms of fan conversions for 5e if that's how you prefer to play. The Sorcerer Kings on both Earth and Athos will never give Dark Sun its happy ending. You, with your friends at your table, or with the rebels of the Veiled Alliance, you'll have to do it yourselves. Because that's really the secret here. Dark Sun isn't a truly dead system, and neither is the hope of a better world within the text. People keep playing, and heroes keep fighting. Dark Sun's great lie should be told with a wink, that it is a hopeless setting, a game without hope. But that just makes it all the more intriguing, doesn't it? Doesn't it make you want to defy the odds? Doesn't it make you want to crawl along shattered lands and come out on the other side? To rise up in the wake of a Ravager, and to accomplish that unwinnable battle of saving this awful world? Dark Sun is a setting that does not contain hope. You're supposed to bring yours in with you. Athos is a problem that cannot be solved by Sorcerer Kings or a publishing company, but it can be solved by a scrappy band of nerds around a table, if they care enough, if they fight hard enough. You are meant to solve this grimdark world, and that is how Evangions are born. Thank you all for listening. It isn't too often that I get to dive into a more literary analysis of these old 90s games. So I hope you enjoyed. This video contained a lot of words like slavery and racism and stuff, so there's a decent chance I'm gonna get hit by that big ol' red no money symbol. It would be incredibly helpful in allowing me to cover games with mature themes if you would consider supporting the channel on Patreon. You get a ton of unique perks, including a patrons-only podcast. Well, that probably does it for Dark Sun as a topic on this channel, since those are the only two games produced in this setting, unless someone finally succeeds at getting the old Dark Sun MMO running after all these years. Next month, we're diving into a different TTRPG system as we cover some of the World of Darkness video games. Cheers, everybody, and I'll see you in October.